Weiss was used to frustrated panic. She hadn't been before Beacon, but after becoming part of Team Jazzberry, it had become such a common feeling that she developed a scale of them. This ranked at about a 2 out of 10. That didn't sound like much, but when you considered that 3 was about the point before homicidal fantasies, and 1 was looking up discreet undertakers to dispose of the bodies, it became a little clearer. It hadn't reached that point yet, primarily because of a certain someone wasn't within her reach. "Where is he?" she hissed, scanning the people around her with stiff shoulders. "I can't believe I let him out of my sight. I can't believe we trusted him to not somehow mess this up." Honestly, neither can I. Blake sighed. He's been so focused lately that I think we forgot who we were dealing with. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he didn't appear until about halfway through the first fight. She rolled her eyes. Even then, he'd do it as some kind of sneak attack to take advantage of an opening. Weiss hummed and tried to smile. She knew Blake was trying to cheer her up, and she appreciated it. The thought of him not making an appearance was terrifying. This was so much more serious than all the stuff he normally chose to skip. What was that idiot thinking? Oh, they've been getting along so well lately. But she was going to remind him exactly who he was playing around with when she next saw him. If this was his idea of a joke, she'd show him one of her own involving her weapon, him, and a tree. She'd recreate initiation, except with her weapon shoved up his ass. "Hey guys!" Ruby cheered, interrupting her thoughts and Jaune's imaginary demise. The young leader looked in fine spirits, and why not? It was the day of the tournament, and her team looked fit to breeze through the early and late stages. Out of everyone here, Pyrrha was definitely going to be a problem. Weiss was banking on Jaune having the solution. Maybe this time she'd let him off for his trickery and blatantly unfair methods of winning fights. "Hey sis!" Yang reached over to ruffle Ruby's head. "You looking forward to getting started?" Ruby pulled away with a pout, but it couldn't last. She laughed and hopped on the spot. "Definitely. I get to show everyone what I'm made of, and we're going to kick butt. Isn't that right, guys?" "Legs will be broken," Nora roared, drawing some wary glances from nearby competitors. Ren sighed and moved over to try and calm her down. Not that he had any success. I believe we have a good chance," she said. "That's great." Pyrrha paused, finally noticing what was wrong. "Where's your partner?" Weiss's shoulders dropped. "He's on his way, I'm sure." "But Weiss," Ruby whispered, "isn't your team's fight in like 40 minutes? "Yes, Ruby." Weiss' palm came up to meet her face. "Yes, it is. I am so going to kill him." It was a stray and idle thought as he pressed the back against the wall and listened to 2 people walk by, chatting about a colleague with food sickness they deemed as being lazy on their busiest day. He waited until they were gone before slipping out and making his way down the corridor. Above him, through the concrete ceiling, the crowd could be heard chanting and roaring as the first fight at the Vital Festival began. That left the backstage areas of the arena in a state of frenzied panic, both from the amount of work that needed to be done and the stressful conditions involved in organizing and running one of the biggest events of the Remnant calendar. Combine that all together, and it wasn't hard to see why people failed to notice a new addition among them. Jaune adjusted the baggy blue uniform on his shoulders and pulled the flat, blue cap down over his eyes. Sometimes blending in was as simple as looking like you belonged, and the Atlas soldier guarding the next corridor let him through after a casual glance at his ID tag. The man there didn't look much like him, but the guards were too busy watching the fight on a nearby screen to notice. SSSN versus BINZ, Jaune thought, taking a quick look before he stepped through the door. I suppose that means the random team generator is still working. If the fights were chosen beforehand, then they'd be the same every repeat. Being chosen at random, however, that meant each repeat only created this opportunity, not the same result. Both teams would still be in attendance, but the machine selected them without interference, leading to potentially different results each and every time. That was fine, though. He'd been through it enough times that he knew the various teams, along with their strengths and weaknesses. B, I, and Z would have been a bad fit for them thanks to the sniper. A single round he couldn't dodge would spell the end of the fight, and likely his life. Ironically, it would also spark a tragedy that only would have helped Cinder when she pulled her usual routine. Sun's team wasn't much better. The guy was slippery, enough so that he'd surely land a hit, and a hit from that staff would do more than enough damage. As he approached his destination, a man in a similar uniform to him blocked his path. "Hey, what are you doing here? This place is off limits." "Not off limits enough, clearly," Jaune said, looking him up and down. "Do you think I'd be here if I wasn't ordered to? There's been an issue with the servers. They need me to check them out." "You're an IT technician?" "No, I'm a janitor." Jaune sighed and flashed his ID card. The man didn't have the time to make out anything before he pulled it back. He could have asked to see it again, but Jaune was fairly sure he'd be too embarrassed to do so. "Of course I'm a technician, moron. Are you going to stand in my way? Would you like to explain to the audience why the next fight won't be happening?" "What? I didn't." The man paused and looked behind him. "I wasn't informed of this. Why didn't someone let me know?" Jaune sighed and planted a hand on his hip. "The same reason they didn't tell me I'd be going through an interrogation. These guys are useless, believe me. You'd think with how regular this thing is that you'd have better procedures in hand. It's like a zoo back there." The man chuckled nervously. There was nothing like joining dislike against a different party to create a sense of trust. Tell me about it," he said. "Everything is last minute, and half the time they don't even tell you what it is until they want you to do it. I guess this is the same." He shrugged and stepped aside, revealing the door for Jaune. "Go ahead then." "Thanks, man." Jaune stepped past and pressed 4 digits into the keypad on the wall, then cursed when it beeped and flashed red. The man looked at him suspiciously. "Is something wrong?" "Damn code isn't working." Jaune growled, entered another 4 random numbers. "They told me it was 8397. They said this was the passcode for all Block 2 doors. Well, this is Block 3. Those fucking idiots." Jaune threw his hands in the air. "Can't they do anything right? Now I've got to waste time calling them and convincing the bloody receptionist this is a serious matter and that no, it can't wait. How fucking useless are they?" Forget it." The other man patted his shoulder and leaned over. He leaned over the keypad and entered the code. "It'll take you ages to get through to those bureaucrats, assholes. So much red tape. Just don't tell anyone I did this for you and we'll be even." "Deal." Jaune laughed. "Sorry about earlier. I'm stressed out. You know what it's like." "I hear you, man. All those influential types up there. It's all people like us can do to stick together." "Damn straight." Jaune bumped a fist against the man's before he stepped into the room and let the door whisk shut behind him. He cracked his neck and pulled the cap off, settling it down on a nearby keyboard. Well, that's one thing dealt with. The room was both shrouded in darkness and illuminated by hundreds of blinking lights, which was a strange paradox, but caused by the various computers, terminals, and screens that lined the walls. None of them showed the fights, however, but instead various lines of code and programming. Jaune pulled a seat over to one and sat down before it. "Username and password, huh?" His fingers flicked across the keys as he entered the details of someone he found however many repeats ago. It wasn't the first time he'd thought of such a plan, but it was the first time he'd be using it in this way. The terminal unlocked, and although that gave him access to records and information, it didn't give him what he wanted. but he could find it. A brief glance at the clock said he didn't have much time left, but he opened up the operating system and started to type in some direct commands, bringing up pages and pages of code. Nonsense and madness to most people. He'd actually spent a few lives learning how to program and hack into computers. The original plan had been to develop some kind of counter-virus for the Atlas robots, then turn them on the attackers at the fall of Beacon. It was maybe 200 lifetimes ago that he tried that. Between fighting, training, and trying to kill Cinder, the learning had been slow, but he'd gotten pretty proficient eventually. It hadn't changed anything, unfortunately. He'd run up against the rather predictable roadblock of resources and secrecy inherent in the Atlas military. He should have known, really. But there was a vast difference between programming and breaking into a routine machine and redesigning an entire AI system. The fact that it was made by the same guy who created Penny, a full-functioning synthetic life form, should have been the first clue. Whoever Cinder got to create that virus was someone special indeed. Probably a person who worked on the Paladin systems in the first place, or a traitor who still did. No amount of time or effort had let him get close to emulating that. The skills were still useful though, so not a complete waste. Here, it let him break into the encryption around the match generator. The security was good, but not perfect. It didn't need to be, since it wasn't like it mattered too much if the fights weren't random. Sure, it would let people dodge or choose fights, but Osborn and Ironwood likely knew it wouldn't make a difference in the long run. Even if you cheated, you'd still have to prove yourself against the strongest team in the finals. I wonder how Cinder manages this from her scroll, he thought, making some quick adjustments for the next fight. If it was another virus, she'd need to break in here, but there were never any reports of that. Not that it meant anything, since here he was doing the exact same thing. Maybe Cinder had a mole inside. It was a possibility. From what he recalled of working under her in that one time, she made it a point to rig the matches the night before they started. Maybe she simply passed information on to someone under her employ, and they snuck in just to do this. It didn't matter. He wrote the last few lines of code, uploaded it, and then logged out of the terminal. His cap came back on and he entered the code he memorized from the other guy to get out. "All done?" he asked. It was a smaller thing than they realized. Not that I'll tell them that, of course. If they want to give me a bonus, I'm all for it. "You got it, boss." Jaune smirked and turned away. "I've got to go for now, though. Duty calls. And trust me, my line manager isn't someone you want to keep waiting." The tyrant? Honestly, she's probably thinking about how much she wants to kill me right now. True to expectation, Weiss's eyes zoned in on the moment he came in within a 100-meter radius. They also locked on, and he could see them narrow as she judged distance to target, his movement patterns, and the exact best way to make him regret every little thing he'd ever done. "In my defense," he said, holding his hands up, "I'm here and the fight hasn't started yet." "Nice." Yang drawled. "I bet that's going to go down well." "You were nearly late," Blake warned. Even she looked a little angry. It wasn't like he could blame her. He turned to Weiss with a raised eyebrow, and then leaned away when he noticed her shoulders shaking. Oh dear. She was either about to cry, or explode. And if someone chose the former, then they clearly didn't know his partner very well. Weiss took a deep breath, and then to his surprise, let it go. "You're not angry?" He tried. "Oh, I'm angry." Weiss. Her smile was as beautiful as it was arctic. "I just recalled that I currently need you in good health for the match ahead. Once that's over and done with, we can then have our little talk. Won't we be too tired for that? Don't worry. You won't be required to do much speaking during it." He winced. "Hey, I got here on time though. I didn't do anything wrong." "You made me panic." Weiss stepped forward so that her face was barely 3 inches from his. Her finger stabbed into his chest, and from the look on her face, she was mildly disappointed it didn't impale him. "Do you have any idea how stressful it was just to sit here and wonder Whether you'd even show up or not. To be fair, wouldn't that make it your fault for doubting me? Weiss huffed and walked away. No, it wouldn't. Jaune blinked and watched her go, then winced when Yang slapped a hand on his back. Smooth moves, Dad, she said. You know, for someone so good of the ladies, you sure can be useless at times. It makes me wonder what just attracts them at all. Laugh it up, dear daughter. He pulled her hand off and sighed. Most women are easier to deal with than Weiss. Most women don't genuinely care for you. He didn't miss the meaning there, not Yang's implied hint. He glared at her, but she only smiled back, as though butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. I'm aware of her feelings. There's no reason to keep bringing it up. Yang shrugged and walked by him, not before blowing him a teasing kiss. She followed over to Weiss, who was deep in conversation with Pyrrha and Ruby, and thus deep in the act of ignoring his presence. He'd known she would be upset, but it wasn't like he could have told her where he was going. Your turn, Blake? He asked, hearing her heels against the grass behind him. I'll respect your judgment on Weiss, she said. If you don't think it will work, I won't push you to try any. Yang just wants what's best for everyone. I know, he sighed. That's just the kind of person she is. Are you saying you're different? Maybe. Maybe not. He wanted to help them too, but it wasn't quite as pure as Yang. She wanted he and Weiss to be happy because she cared about their happiness. He wanted to protect them because he wanted his friends to live. It was selfish, but then again, what wasn't? I'm only human after all. Is something wrong? Blake asked. Nothing, he said. I'd best go grovel at Weiss's feet for an apology. Wish me well, sweetie. You're my favorite little girl, after all. Is that something to be proud of when my competition is Yang? Just because the competition is low and annoying doesn't mean you shouldn't feel proud. Idiot. Blake laughed. Jaune grinned and made to move away, but she caught his arm before he could leave. Blake? Her face was deadly serious. If something is bothering you, and I know you say it isn't, she added, but if there is, you could talk to me about it. He stared at her. I know I'm probably not the best person to speak to. I ran away from my own problems and can barely face them even now. I'm still hiding my heritage from most people, but I can listen and, well, I try my best to help. Jaune's eyes softened. Even his teammates squirmed uncomfortably on the spot. She wasn't used to such overt displays of affection. She never was. That she'd be willing to say all that, it spoke of just how much she cared. Thank you, Blake. I'll keep that in mind. He nodded to her, and she seemed relieved by the formality of the response. A slow grin appeared. Really though, I see Daddy's little girl is pulling out all the stops today. Don't tell me there's something you want me to buy. It's not like that. Weiss was right. You're insufferable. Guilty. Where were you anyway? Before this, I mean. What were you doing that took you so long to get here? I was doing some research on our potential opponents. It would serve as a useful excuse for his knowledge. I managed to find some records of what they're good at and bad at. It might give us the edge we need. If you told Weiss that, she might have taken it better. If I thought up the excuse ahead of time, I'd have tried. He shrugged and gestured over to the others with a nod. Blake nodded back and the two of them made their way over. Weiss shot him an irritated look, but scoffed and turned back to Ruby when he smiled at her. Ruby giggled. Shh, it looks like they're calling the next fight. Nora hissed, bringing them all to silence. She leaned forwards on the rail, eyes light up. Oh, I hope it's us. I hope it's us. Nora, it's only the second bout. There are still plenty of other people to pick from. But it could be us, Rennie. It could be. Jaune chuckled and kept his face towards them. Even as his eyes shifted over to the left, he could just make out Cinder and her people there, probably 10 or 20 seats further down. Their eyes were fixed on the arena, but Mercury had his feet up on the railing before them. It suggested they didn't intend for their fight to be now, which was lucky. He didn't want to show his hand too early after all. His eyes narrowed on Mercury's boots. Huh. Now that's an idea. We'll have to see what I can do about that. Oh, it's stopping, Nora whispered. She leaned over to look at the holographic reel, and despite Weiss's loud scoff at Nora's behavior, her hands gripped the railing just that little tighter, and the results clicked into place. Team NDGO of Shade Academy, Peter commentated. Now here's a team of spunk, or so I hear. 4 lovely ladies with skills that will soon teach you not to judge a fighter based on their appearance. Indeed, Peter, and rightly so. So, for these girls are forced to be reckoned with, and against them will be... Oblek trailed off, building suspense as the wheel turned. Team Jazzberry of Beacon Academy, Oblek shouted. Hold on to your seats, ladies and gentlemen, because if I know my teams, this one is bound to be an explosive show. The crowd roared, muting the sounds of Weiss's shock and Nora's disappointment. He sat through it all, not showing quite the same reaction as his team, who now looked far more nervous than they had before, where they doubted. He could only smirk.